What up, Wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG, it's where the magic happens, and the Dungeons & Dragons set is finally out. So you know what that means. It's time for a pithy little list that we can all quibble about. Here's the top 20 cards and adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back with a quick reminder before we jump in. It's part of my job. I apologize in advance. But if you'd like and subscribe, that would be super solid of you. As a matter of fact, my subscribers are among the smartest and most attractive, I guess, people in the world. So don't you want to be one of those? You can also watch me play some magic cards with this new set on twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, or support the channel over on Patreon. Patreon supporters are what really keeps this channel going. So thanks to all of my existing Patreon supporters. I need you. You're awesome. But aside from that, I guess I should transition into talking about magical cards, because that's why you clicked on the video. So we got 20 cards to talk about. I should go ahead and get to it with an honorable mention for Asmodeus the Archfiend. So it's Gristle Potence, or Necro Brand, something like that. It's a bunch of cards jammed together. Gristle Brand's bargain, I guess you could call it. I do like the idea of playing Necropotence as my commander. I think that's really, really sweet, just from an old school Magic player's perspective. But I'm not sure how great the card actually is in competitive formats, so that's why it's not on the actual list. But I did want to bring it up, even though it's probably a devil to make work. Let's go ahead and start the list here with number 20, which, as usual, is kind of like an honorable mention that I think is good enough. And this time around, it's Sorcerer Class. Now, I knew I wanted this slot to be a class, but it took me a long time to choose between this and Paladin Class. I also like Ranger Class, but that was already in the Sleepers video. If you haven't seen that, go check it out, because there's probably going to be some things that don't appear on this list, and you're going to be like, where's X or Y card? It's probably on the Sleepers list. Go check that out after this. But anyway, self-promotion bit over. Sorry about that. Anyway, Sorcerer Class, I think I ended up liking better than Paladin Class just because it looks like a better time. And I'm here for a good time. Don't get me wrong. Paladin Class looks strong, but Sorcerer Class could see more play in Commander before the end of the day, so maybe it's a better card for that reason. But even in formats like Standard and even Modern, I think this could see some play in Modern. This could be a nice like one-of inclusion, kind of a silver bullet as an alternate win condition, because it will win the game pretty quickly once you get to level 3. In Standard, I think you can do this fairly easily too, and all three of the modes are at least like kind of usable. Like the first mode is draw 2, discard 2, which is easy to abuse in a lot of ways, and that's a nice enter the battlefield trigger. The second mode turns all your guys into dorks, kind of, which is nice. And if you don't have like a spell to use that on, you can just use your dudes to level up the Sorcerer Class, and then the next turn you start slinging spells and going crazy, and suddenly you're dealing all the damage, right? Like 3 spells is 6 damage, 4 spells is 10 damage, so you should be able to close the game out pretty quickly with this, and I can't wait to get to playing with it, because the card does look like it has some class. Now for number 19, let's cheat already. You know I do that sometimes, so I'm not going to apologize. Sorry. But anyway, I think saying not sorry is cringeworthy enough to be sorry for nowadays. But anyway, number 19 is Venture 3 drops. Now there's 3 of these that I like. I'm trying to remember their names. Sararak, Nadar, and Varus Silvery Moon Ranger. Did I get all these right? I think I may have nailed all of these. I think a Sararak is actually the best one, and I would have thought it was the worst one just a couple of days ago, but actually, this card is kind of a beating a lot of the time, and once it's actually out, it's a ridiculous, attacks trigger, because it attacks, and then you sacrifice something, and you still have to block, even though you just sacrificed a guy. You basically have to have 2 dudes out whenever this guy attacks to not take a buttload of damage. And if you do sacrifice a guy, that's all well and good, but if you don't sacrifice a guy, you still have to block it, and your opponent gets a free creature. A Sararak is actually a serious headache. As far as the other 2 go, Nadar will get you through a dungeon really fast, and has pretty good stats and mana cost for the rate that you're paying for it. And Varus also gets you through a dungeon very quickly when you consider that even though the ability only procs once a turn, usually the creatures that you're playing in these dungeon decks will also venture when they ETB. So like a lot of times every creature you play is 2 ventures, and that'll get you deep. For number 18, let's talk about the goodest boy in the set. It's Loyal Warhound. I love this thing. Every entry on the list so far, all 3 of them if you count the honorable mention, have all been like expensive to make work, kind of slow build arounds and whatnot that take a lot of opportunity cost in terms of like all the other cards that have to go in your deck to make those work. Loyal Warhound is not like that. It's content simply being a good Magic card, and I respect that. I think just on stats alone, this is at least not embarrassing in your mono white aggro deck. 2 mana, 3/1 vigilance just thrown in, I guess, so you can have that. That's pretty sweet, but if it does do like a Knight of the White Orchid impression, it's actually a really sweet Magic card, and we know that because we've played with Knight of the White Orchid before, so it's a pretty easy comparison to make. But aside from that, this is going to be another cool 2-drop for the Dogs deck or the Winota Dogs deck. Goes really well with Pack Leader because, you got a Pack Leader out, you can just swing with this and not really worry about its relatively low toughness. So there's a lot of cool things about this card, but even after Dogs are kind of not really a thing in the format anymore, as if they ever were, but when they don't even have any payoffs whatsoever, this will still be at least a solid creature in white aggro decks, so I like it. Speaking of just solid dudes, number 17 is Minx, something like that. But this is kind of a dope card here, just on rate alone, 3 mana, and yeah, it's Naya colors, meaning that it's supposed to be harder to do that, but it's 3 mana for 4 power, 4 toughness on 2 bodies, which is fine. Like, even if it never ever pumps and you need the mana for other stuff for the entire rest of the game, like, you paid pretty decent, rate for what you're actually getting for the card. But once you do pump some mana, it's really, really good, right? Like, the hamster can become a 5/5 pretty easily, or 4/4 on the next turn. Like, if all you do is drop this on turn 3 and then on turn 4 you swing for 7, like, that seems all right. So, I don't know, I just kind of like the card. I like having a nicely costed body that isn't necessarily an embarrassing rate by itself, that comes with another body just tacked on, that has a keyword ability, that's sweet, and also acts as a mana sink for the rest of the game. Like, there are just so many, obviously cool things about Minx, but it's not like over the top or anything. I'm a big fan of the card. But number 16, a legendary creature that I like a little bit more, and I've been labbing with a lot more, and that's Collane. I think this is sneakily one of the best cards in the entire set, and other content creators, not just me, have been going on and on about how good they think this card might be, and a few content creators have even shown you that on YouTube already. This is a really good looking card for a lot of different situations. If you have a gold span out, suddenly all this treasure produces double mana, and if it produces double mana, that means it's going to put double counters on a creature. When you spend that mana, and that's just with a Goldspan Dragon out. There are a whole lot of other ways to abuse this card very quickly in a game of Magic. Just last thing I'll say about the card, and I'm sorry because I know I've been going on about her for a while now, but I think she might be that good, and I had to really restrain myself from putting this card in the top 10. This is a fantastic looking Magic card to me, but end of the day, think about this card like a 2-mana mana dork that can tap for mana precisely once and never again, but it has haste, meaning the card allows you to do 2 things. You can either explode onto the board in a very early turn with a bunch of like little critters or, small actions, or you can save that treasure token and ramp into a 4 or 5 drop a turn ahead of schedule later in the game. And that kind of versatility, some real artistry. Now, my number 15 is Wish, and I need to apologize to the D&D players because I know Wish is supposed to be like the most powerful spell of all time ever in the history of the world. So it should just be the number 1 card in the set. So I'm sorry I have the gall to put it all the way here at number 15, but that still means that not only is it good enough to make the list, it's good enough to see play in multiple formats, possibly, Not only standard, but historic, modern, for what it's worth, this could see some amount of play in any deck that makes a whole lot of mana all in one turn, and Modern obviously has a couple of decks that are famous for doing just that, but Standard has plenty of decks that can make all the mana in the world, so I don't think it'll be too uncommon to see this into a 7-mana spell late enough into the game. I'm always going to like cards like this, and I'm glad that Wizards started printing them again in the last few years, but they're not quite as strong or as, as cheap, as good on rate as some of the other Wishes that we've seen in the past, but I do think these are still really powerful effects for what it's worth, and I think this one is worth quite a bit. Also, from my Magic playing bucket list, I'd really like to wish upon a Star of Extinction at some point in my life. But anyway, let's move on to number 14, which I am reluctant to put on the list at all, but it does appear as though it's going to matter. So number 14 is the Book of Exalted Deeds. Now look, I still am of the opinion this is probably a meme, but it's a much stronger meme than a card like Tybalt's Trickery was. In case you haven't seen this yet, the idea with this card is to turn your Faceless Haven on, and since Faceless Haven has every creature type, it's an angel. So you just put the counter on your Faceless Haven, and it stays there, even after your Faceless Haven isn't a creature anymore. And yes, it still works, even if your Faceless Haven isn't a creature. So once you have 6 mana, which is a buttload of mana, you do this all on the same turn. Change your Faceless Haven into a creature, activate Book, put the counter on the Faceless Haven, and you have assembled a Facebook. So that should win, unless your opponent has Field of Ruin, or Smashing Success, or Lithiform Blight, or Waking the Trolls, or a bunch of other things that they could disrupt this with. They could also just counter the Book of Exalted Deeds when you go to play that. They could also just break the Book of Exalted Deeds. They could do that if you play it before you actually can do the Haven combo all in one turn. There's plenty of ways to smash it with Artifact Destruction or Binding the Old Gods on curve. You know, there's a million ways to deal with this combo, and I don't think that it's going to be a best of 3 deck. But in best of 1, you probably want to carry some Field of Ruins or some sort of main deck Artifact Destruction. Like something that does other stuff, like Prismari Command or Quandrix Command, right? You probably want to carry some answers if you're in best of 1, because even though, again, I don't think this is going to be like a real competitive deck in best of 3, I don't think. I'm pretty sure. I'm still pretty sure best of 1 players are going to encounter this like constantly. So I'm sorry about that. But for number 13, let's look at old George W. over here, Grim Wanderer. Probably the better name for him. That's his actual name. This is a sweet-looking Magic card. Because it's a goblin, I just noticed that. Like, right before I came on camera. I was like, oh, you're a goblin. That's a point in your favor. But that's not what this is really about. What this is really about is a 2-mana 5/3 flash that I think is probably going to see play in multiple formats. It is actually really easy to proc, you know. It doesn't matter if it's your creatures that died or your opponent's creatures that died. Just something died. And you can morbid this into play at the end of their turn for 2 mana. Or maybe you Village Right something when they go to declare attacks and flash this into block. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with this card. And the flash gives it an effective form of haste. You play it at the end of the turn, and then you untap with it. It's not summoning sick anymore. So you just swing for 5, and they never saw it coming like it's Persona 5. It's just a sweet... This is a good-looking Magic card that goes really well in all these sacrifice decks that are somewhat in vogue in Standard right now. And if they're going to come up, this might be a good way to help them do that. So I think this is a very good Magic card in case you were wandering. I'm sorry. Now, for number 12, I'm going to take a swing here, because I don't know how many lists this card is going to be on or anything, and I haven't really heard much talk about it. But what I think is easily one of the stronger cards in the set for Standard, if nothing else, is Frog Hemoth, the Greenspan Dragon. I'm going to start calling him Alan Greenspan. Nobody that watches the channel is going to know who Alan Greenspan is. But anyway, old Greenspan Dragon over here is a 5-mana 4/4 haste, which is kind of why I'm comparing it to the best red creature in the format right now. But aside from that, it's also kind of doing a Scavenging Ooze impression a little bit. And that's great, because this thing's going to get huge. Like, all of a sudden, there are going to be turns where you play this, swing with it, and it just becomes an 8/8. Deal with that, you know? Like, and they're going to have to, or they'll eventually just die to it, and relatively quickly, too. It's even got a form of evasion. It doesn't fly like Goldspan, but it does trample over. So even if your opponent does have a somewhat decent blocker for it the turn that you play it, odds are it's still going to get pretty big. So just a sweet... It looks so good. This would be nothing without the haste, but given the fact that it does have haste, I think this is going to catch a lot of people by surprise, get huge out of nowhere, and deprive your opponent of important graveyard resources. So just a sweet looking card. I don't just dig it, I rib it. Is that the worst pun in the video? I can probably do better. But anyway, let's move on to number 11, kind of an honorable mention for the top 10. And this time I'm gonna cheat a couple of times in a row here. I'm just letting you know. But this time I'm just gonna say Plainswalkers. And I like pretty much every Plainswalker in the set. But I guess if I had to do a top 3, it would probably be Mordenkainen, which pains me to say, because I think Lolth is probably the better Plainswalker to my mind, because I like spiders, and I like black Plainswalkers, and I like mid-range decks. Yeah, Lolth I think is like a cooler looking Plainswalker. But Mordenkainen actually looks really strong to me. I know this costs 6 mana, but the draw cards ability is super strong, and it's a +2, which I think matters greatly. And the ultimate's not super hard to get to, and once you do get to it, you win the game. Probably. So I just think this card is like kind of good despite the mana cost. And if there is a mid-range deck with Plainswalkers and blue cards, this might be playable. I will say that decks that have blue in them probably don't want 6 mana Plainswalkers because they'd rather hold up mana to play counter spells. So just the fact that this is blue is kind of a strike against it, but I think the card actually looks relatively strong, especially the -2 that makes like a 7/7 sometimes. It seems all right. Anyway. Next is Zarya, I believe her name is, the red 4 mana Plainswalker. This looks sweet if you have like a large board of creatures, but if you don't have a large board of creatures, she's got your back. She can just make creatures for you at 0 loyalty. That's good. And the ultimate is sweet too. I like a lot about Zarya, and I think this is just a strong Plainswalker on a lot of different axes, but the best Plainswalker in the set? Probably Bahamut or Grandmaster of Flowers, whatever you want to call them. 2 decent abilities. The Detain ability is very good. The Detain ability makes it not only so that you can't attack with a creature on your next turn, which means that you're protecting, Grandmaster's protecting himself, but you also can't block with that creature. So it's a really good main phase 1 ability in aggro decks, which is what this is going to go in. The second ability is actually even better than I thought it was at first glance, because this can also get monks from your graveyard. So that's fantastic. Basically a never-ending monk train, if you want it to be. And then finally, once it does have the 7 loyalty, and you can keep it that way, it'll just close games out, right? A 7/7 flying indestructible guy is going to win games very easily, and it's kind of a form of reach for these aggro decks in the late game. Sometimes your opponent's going to be able to sweep the table, but they're not going to be able to do much about a Plainswalker, so it'll just plus its way into being able to kind of attack with haste, right? Because you'll plus it on main phase 1 from 6 to 7, and you can swing with it. So in a way, that's kind of a point in its favor too. It can kind of ultimate on the same turn that it gets to the loyalty it needs to quote-unquote ultimate. So I don't know, there's a bunch of different points in this card's favor. The aggro decks it belongs in are probably going to be able to protect it well enough to get it to the 7 loyalty you need to win games. And in the meantime, even if it never becomes a 7/7, it's still letting creatures, it's locking down creatures so where they can't attack or block, and that's really important. Or it's just playing more board presence for you. So this card just works, whether it's top decked or whether you actually play it on curve. There's a lot of great things about this card, and I think that Plainswalkers only get better after rotation. Matter of fact, I think mid-rangey type philosophies, these 4 and 5 mana Plainswalkers, just get better period after rotation. So, it's got rotation to look forward to, but it's probably one of the better 4-drops that white aggro can play in the meantime too. So I think the card is destined for some pretty big stuff. Now for number 10, I said I was going to cheat again, so you knew that was going to happen, but cracking the top 10 here, I'm going to say dragons. Now, just like Plainswalkers, they're not necessarily all created equal in terms of how they were designed. There are 3 dragons I like more than the other dragons. In terms of the one that I think is worst but still worth mentioning, it's probably, this is actually really tough. It's probably Inferno of the Star Mounts, even though this is the card that I've enjoyed playing the most of all these dragons so far in what little time we've been able to play the set. I really like Inferno of the Star Mounts, and I think it's destined to see real standard play, whether possibly right now or definitely after rotation. Very strong card. Don't pay attention to the you can win the game off of this. I don't think that's what you're supposed to even be trying to do. I just think that a 6 mana 6/6 haste flying guy that can't be countered is often really good just on its own. And then if it gets to swing again, it's going to swing for like 12. So that's the thing ends the game in a hurry. But also, really like Emerith. I think that's how you say its name. The blue one. This is kind of a Dragon Lord Ojutai if you look at it long enough and just as sideways, and you tilt your head all the way. It kind of does an Ojutai impression. And I think that's probably going to be good enough in Standard. This could draw you multiple cards in a turn, and it's really difficult to deal with. It's especially difficult for your opponent to deal with it before you get at least one swing in. That's where I like the card. The stats are pretty good, fine card. It's probably going to see, one of play in the odd control deck here and there. So I like that, or the odd mid-range deck here and there. Just a sweet little card. But the best of these so far, at least to me, looks to be Ebon Death, which you probably saw coming, you know. This does die to Bone Crusher Giant, but it also lines up really well against a Bone Crusher Giant. So I kind of like that. A little push-pull there. But, you know, if you have removal spells, or if you swing in and your opponent kills something on blocks or with a Heartless Act or something, then suddenly Ebon Death comes back. And you don't mind that it comes into play tap most of the time. You just can't flash it in to block, but so. That's kind of how I respond to that criticism is, so. What you can do is flash it in at the end of your opponent's turn and then swing with a 5-power guy the next turn. So that's good. Just really kind of difficult to actually do anything about this, especially once we lose a lot of the exile removal we currently have access to. It's going to be kind of difficult to really deal with this forever. So I'm a huge fan of Ebon Death, and I think it's kind of easily the best of all the dragons. But number 9 is the Leader of the Pack. It's an oldies song. Does anybody remember Leader of the Pack? It's actually a super dope song. But anyway, Werewolf Pack Leader is it's a really solid duder, man. I wish I could say more about it than that, but this is a really aggressively costed thing that is a great mana sink in the late game, gets even bigger when you do sink the mana into it, and can also draw you cards. So just straight gas for mono green in multiple formats, and not just standard and historic, but possibly even modern wants a creature like this. There might be better options the farther back you go, but this is, again, in terms of what mono green has had access to in the past, a very, very strong creature. Watch Wolf stats that gets bigger and, again, gasses you up late game. Like, yeah, I wish I had more to say, or like something witty or clever or something like that, but I've already used my Leader of the Pack joke. So I got nothing else other than to say, like, this is just an obviously extremely strong Magic card. But number 8 is Flame Skull. Maybe the actual best recurable creature in the format after rotation happens. This is a decent on-rate mono-red creature that attacks fairly well, and when it does die, draws you cards, or just comes back. But if you don't really have use for a Flame Skull at the moment, you can also just cash in for a different card. Or maybe you ripped a card that's just objectively better than Flame Skull, even if you could use a Flame Skull, in which case you'll probably give it up. Get out of here. I'll take the better cards. A mono-red dude that has the ability to either get you a good card off the top of your deck or just come back and keep attacking. I just can't find a real issue with this card. I do hate that it can't block, and that sucks, but I still think that this is probably going to be a really important card in mono red decks, and possibly even some other decks, after rotation, and maybe even before. I'm not sure this really takes the place of a card like Phoenix of Ash until then, but it could. My number 7 is Guardian of Faith, and again, you can tell we're getting into really strong cards when there's not a whole lot of tech to spread around. There's not a whole lot of like specific niche situations with other cards and combos and interactions I have to talk about. All I have to do is point at the text box and be like, that's a good card. Guardian of Faith obviously is. The cool thing about this, I don't think enough people are talking about, is the fact that it saves all your dudes by phasing them rather than flickering them or returning them to your hand or anything like that. The way this works, you can do some really fun stuff, right? Like anything attached to the creature, like an equipment or an aura or a +1/+1 counter or whatever, they all stay attached. Creatures like Gelatinous Cube, which we'll talk about in a second, like Fiend Hunter type creatures, keep the creature up under them that they've exiled. So that's a really important bit there. You can also just like block, phase all your guys out. They phase back in on your turn. Alpha Strike seems ridiculous. Some of the stuff this card allows you to do, and it's a it's a decently statted body with flash in its own right too, depending on what the game state's looking like. You might just be able to flash this in at the end of your opponent's turn because it's a solid threat and swing for the win, if all you have left is a bolt's worth of damage to do. So there's a lot of really sweet stuff about Guardian, and I think that not only is it destined for standard play in some deck or another, but this might also be decent in like Modern Spirits. There's a lot of really cool stuff about Guardian. And again, it's just a really good Magic card, and I think that's easy enough to see. My number 6 is Sphere of Annihilation, which I'm happy to say is as good as I thought it was going to be. I wasn't sure if this card was a meme or not, because you have to wait a whole turn for it to really do anything, and what if your opponent can close the door before it rolls around to your next turn? But most of the time, that's not how the card works out. Most of the time, not only does this blow up everything on your opponent's side of the table, but it also locks them out of playing cards on their turn, right? Because they don't want anything to die to Sphere of Annihilation. So, if you've got a Sphere of Annihilation set to X equals 4, they can only play like 5 and 6 drops and up. If they have any important 3 or 4 drops they want to play, they kind of can't. And that's a mode on this card that I think is kind of hidden and matters a lot. The idea that your opponent might just win the game in the turn that you give them to do stuff, it'll happen occasionally, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to happen as much as you might fear that it will. And in fact, this actually just keeps your opponent from playing Magic for a turn. So I think this is actually a lot better than I originally thought, and I originally thought it was good. Another black card, actually, that's just as good as I originally thought it was, is Gelatinous Cube. And this is actually my personal favorite card in the set for like a million reasons. I love Gelatinous Cube, for one. It's one of the few Dungeons & Dragons creatures like I knew about before the set came out. I say few. I guess I knew a fair. I knew Beholders and Mind Flayers and some other stuff. But I've always been really partial to Gelatinous Cube. So I'm glad that it got a card. And I'm glad that card is Ravenous Chupacabra, basically. It's not only Chupacabra, though. It's Chupacabra that it has better stats. It gets +2/+1. It's like an unholy strength Chupacabra. But it can also completely it can poop out the creature. Chupacabra just eats the creature and then I guess throws it back up. Well, it never does. Chupacabra just ends the creature when it comes into play. This is more akin to, again, a Fiend Hunter or Skyclave Apparition or something. But you can just eat the creature if you need a mana sink later. If your opponent tries to point a removal spell at the cube and you have the mana open, might as well eat the dude and just poop him out. So this, poop him into exile. There have been multiple decks in black that I feel like couldn't come together because they didn't have an effect like this. Black mid-range decks, black creature decks and whatnot have just not been what they could be because they don't have a body that kills stuff, or at least a body that kills stuff as efficiently as you want it to. So Gelatinous Cube is a very welcome addition to the format. And again, just not only a good Magic card, but I'm trying to be objective here, so there's 4 cards ahead of it, but my personal favorite card from the set by a mile. Number 4 is Treasure Vault, which I'm beginning to appreciate more and more every day. In Modern, this goes into Affinity as probably at least a 2 of, if not the 4 of. It could be a 4 of. Again, I've seen people say that they'd rather play like 4 Darksteel Citadel and 2 this. I would just play 4 of this and 2 Darksteel or just 4 of both. I'm not really sure. But I think this is probably just a better card than Darksteel Citadel most of the time. Because, if you have enough mana, you can pop it to, increase your cranial plating count or whatever, just your artifact count in general, which that can increase your affinity count if you wanted it to. There's just a lot of reasons. Maybe you want to fix your mana so that you can cast a Shrapnel Blast or a Galvanic Blast or something like that. And so the treasures matter. There's a lot of reasons why this is going to go into Affinity until the end of time. But even in Standard, I think this is a sweet card. First of all, this can be found off of Ingenious Smith's ability, which I think is cool. It can be found off of Arcanist Owl's ability, which is really sweet. Both of those ETB triggers can find this card. It's an artifact for things like All That Glitters, which has already mattered on stream tonight, or on stream the other night. And a bunch of other stuff. Just anything that counts artifacts counts this card. The only bad thing about it is that you can't cast it out of your graveyard with an Emery because you don't cast lands, you play lands. That's kind of sucky, but I still think the card is really, really cool. Anytime you're counting up artifacts, this is effectively a 0-cost artifact that can create more artifacts and ramp you and sort of. So just a really good card. It does not only a bunch of really cool, wrinkly stuff in Standard, it gives you a lot of layers in your artifact deck. I mean, artifact decks want a critical mass of artifacts, and this lets you play 4 of them free. Artifact lands are always very, very good. And, again, beyond Standard, this almost certainly sees Modern play, and I don't see why it wouldn't. So, easily one of the best cards in the set. And, for what it's worth, Commander play too. I imagine some decks are going to want a card like this. But here we are, the top 3 cards in the set. And if you thought you were going to get through this without hearing a funny name, sorry, because number 3 is Oswald Fiddlebender. I feel like I should do a little Oswald Fiddlebender. So is number 3 here, and I'm actually not sure how much this affects standard, but it could. I've already seen a few people on Arena that are trying to abuse this card as much as possible. You know, you spin into things like Solemn Simulacrum, and that lets you spin into a Forsaken Monument while also drawing a card off the Simulacrum, and the Simulacrum also gave you an ETB trigger. So there's some pretty strong things to do in standard with Oswald, but what I'm really looking at this for is it a commander. Now, in Modern, it's good too, don't get me wrong. Like, Birthing Pod for artifacts is just, like, obviously a good card. So, like, the card looks like it might see some play in Modern. And honestly, the farther you go back, the better the card gets because you get more strong artifacts. So, you know, even in Legacy, this could be a playable Magic card. But in Commander, I think it's probably the best white Commander since at least SRAM. And possibly even better than SRAM. It's just, again, Pod for artifacts is very exciting in multiple formats. So, you know, I shouldn't have to tell you it's a really good Magic card. My number 2 is Demilich. You knew it was going to show up eventually, and a lot of you probably thought it was going to be number 1, didn't you? Didn't you? I bet you did. Demilich is difficult to make work, but not too difficult for it to be worth it. This looks like it costs 4 blue mana, but it actually costs 0 mana is what this costs. This costs no mana to cast. Most of the turns that you cast, at least in my very short-lived experience with the card so far. Sometimes you will cast this for 1 or 2 blue and feel pretty good about it. But very often I've been casting this for free a lot more than I thought I was going to cast it for free. But if the free 4-power dude that you can play out of your graveyard over and over wasn't enough for you, there's also the fact that when it attacks, you just get to play something out of your yard, which is stupid. I really don't think that mode should be on the card. I think it should just be like a medium recursible creature for spells decks. Call it a day. But it turns out that what actually pushes the card over the edge is the ability to recast stuff out of the yard. Even if you're just recasting single target removal spells, it is very much good enough. So it is a good card, but it's not number 1. Number 1 this time around is actually the creature lands. Now, I've been asking for creature lands forever, it feels like, you know? Like, I feel like for the last 5 sets in the Cards I Want videos, I'm like, can we get creature lands? And we have been getting them. Crawling Barrens we got Faceless Haven. These are good cards. But we got 5 new creature lands that are all very good in this set. As far as the rankings of them, they're all pretty good. The blue one costs a whole lot to activate. The white one costs a lot to activate, but the creature does have evasion. So that's pretty good. The green one is an amazing mana sink, so I like that one a lot. I've already seen it be a 12/12 in the last 3 days. The red one is really good for extending your board state after a sweeper, and the blacks one is probably my best one. It's got my favorite one. It's got an evasive ability, and it's really good at affecting the game state against certain decks. So, I don't know. All of these are really, really solid, though. I think that they're all great additions. They're going to help run control out of the format, you know, uncounterable creatures and whatnot. Unsweepable creatures, or at least sorcery speed removal doesn't hit them. And I just think that we're in a format right now that needed this. Again, we already had Crawling Barrens. We already had a Faceless Haven, but I wanted creature lands that can produce a color of mana and are actually, like, you know, playable. And all of these have, like, decent enough bodies to actually win games by themselves. Like, these are all very good, and I think they're going to see play in Standard the entire time they're in Standard. There's almost no real opportunity cost to play these cards whatsoever, so you might as well. It's just, these are, in my mind, the actual strongest cards in the deck. They'll see in the set. They'll see Commander play. They'll see Historic play. They may even see Modern play from time to time. So, you know, it seems like a weird pick for number 1, but in some ways, to me, it's super obvious that the creature lands are just the best cards in this set at the end of the day. They might not be the most broken, but I think they might consistently go in the highest number of decks and do the most work, at least in Standard. You know, they'll see play in other formats too. So I'll stand by this pick, and I think it's pretty easy to say this isn't like when I picked Glorious Protector. These will definitely see play. But that's my list, and it's also almost all the time I have because the red light on my camera is flashing. That means it's going to just go off any minute now. But anyway, that means I got to cruise through this intro. The next video we do is going to be 5 Color Dragons, the deck tech. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and get all that. and all the other Forgotten Realms stuff that we're going to do in this format, because there's honestly, especially with 2022 Standard being a thing, there's a lot more to talk about for the next couple of months than I thought there was going to be. And Forgotten Realms is already shaping up to be a better set in Standard than we thought it was going to be. So just a really sweet time to be a Magic player right now. Make sure you sub to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications, like the video, and check me out over here at these web addresses to do various things like watch me play Magic or support the channel. So do that stuff, and hit me up in the comments section to let me know how you felt about all my picks. Anything that didn't make the list, I'm sorry, Minion of the Mighty and like 5 other cards aren't here. But let me know what those cards should have been down there in the comments section. And if any of these picks are just terrible, then let me know that too. But for now, I'm going to leave it to you. I'm going to get out of here and start editing this video. Try to get this done before the camera cuts off. I love you all. I am Deb from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.